right, this is Mike Flynn, and I'm joined by Brad Pollina this time.
Hello, Michael.
Hello, it's been a long day. I'm not sure what order these are going to air, but it's been a long, good day. We saved the best guest for last, actually.
Too kind.
We've got Ben Friedland, who is vice chairman and co-head of CBRE's alternative investments practice. I think you had like 25 years plus in the industry.
Yep.
At least 1,000 transactions negotiated. But most importantly, a recognized leader, I think, in New York City office leasing. So welcome, Ben. Thanks so much for joining us.
Appreciate you guys having me.
Absolutely. So let's just jump right into it. I think probably a lot of the people listening are a little bit confused about what alternative investment practices are. And
yeah, my mom doesn't understand it.
Yeah, exactly.
Either.
Like my mom, if she's listening, which she probably will, be like, what's that? So maybe spend like a minute on that, and then let's talk about how you got into that niche, actually.
Sure. So alternative investments are really hedge funds, private equity firms, venture capital. Think of finance, non-banking.
Right.
And so they're a little bit different when you think about the size of banks, how they make decisions, how they handle their real estate. It's much more corporate than hedge funds and private equity firms. They're more boutique in nature. Some of them have gotten enormous, but it's a different vibe throughout.
Right. Yeah, probably not household names other than like the Blackstones maybe of the world, but that makes a lot of sense.
That's right.
And how did you intentionally gravitate toward that type of client, or?
So, better to be lucky than good. When most brokers you start out working on small things. The people that I worked with focused on high end. So I started by working on small high end deals, and the timing was great. It was when a lot of the hedge funds were just originally launching. And when you work with someone from the beginning before they get really big, it's like the same reason rock stars and athletes have their entourage, because they're the only people that they trust because they knew them before they got big.
Right.
So I worked with a lot of these people before they got big, and then have continued to work with them as they've grown.
Right. Now that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
So I think what would be interesting for us to hear from you about, Ben, is, from our perspective, you've established yourself as a thought leader in this niche, and I'm going to say niche rather than niche because I think I'm just probably a little bit of a Philistine compared to you guys.
I love that you brought that one in. So I'll be the Philistine then.
You like what I did there?
Yeah.
So look, I mean, there's a broad leasing market in New York City. You operate in a fairly specialized sector of that market. What have you done to essentially, I guess, differentiate yourself and build a strong, not only reputation, but a pipeline of business?
Well, I'd start by saying that obviously the New York City marketplace is unbelievably competitive. And if you're a generalist at something, then there's going to be someone else who's a specialist at the thing that the group wants from you. And it's going to be very hard for the generalist to beat the specialist. So I'm a huge fan of specialization. And so what happened for me, again, I was focusing on the high-end part of the market, and I'll always remember the first building that I learned just all the way was 712 Fifth Avenue, and I learned that, and I knew that building better than anyone. And then almost like a war strategy, it was sort of like I'd fortified that area and then expanded out from there, and I became, known in the office as the person who knew that part of town better than anyone. And again, if I didn't specialize, I wouldn't be that. But CBRE has 300 brokers. If you're a generalist, it's very hard to stand out from the pack. And if you have recommendations, as you said, building a brand, it's one thing to say, hi, you should meet my broker friend. He's really good. Or, hey, you're a hedge fund. My friend's the head of the hedge fund group. You should talk to him. So the specialization works all the way. And I'd also add, it's a virtuous cycle. The more business I do, the more specialized I become, the more attractive I become as a specialist. And it just keeps going around and around.
Right. So, in many ways, I actually think about this a little bit like I think about branding and marketing and business development for lawyers, right? You can be a generalist, and there are plenty of generalists in the world, but to say, look, I'm going to be a trademark lawyer, I'm going to be a commercial leasing specialist, I'm going to be an environmental lawyer.
Right.
That's, I think, objectively a stronger way to approach your competition and the market, right?
Yeah. So I used to do a training, and the way that I tried to highlight it for everyone is I said, all right, you've got 3 friends, and they're going out for dinner, and one wants chicken parm, one wants lobster, and one wants steak. Option A is you go to a diner, that serves all three. And option B is there's a food truck where one food truck does chicken parm, one does only lobster, and one does only steak. Where are you going to get a better meal? And so it's so obvious. And I think the same thing is happening throughout all professions. You think about doctors, and the ones who get paid the most now are not generalists, they're really specialists. And I would add that I think that the fact that the world's more interconnected than ever before, things like LinkedIn, it used to be a mediocre service provider would still get a mediocre amount of business. But now if you're looking for something specific, you can find this social proof online of who the right person is for that specific task.
Right. No, that makes sense. And I think we get this from dealing with different types of clients also. I'm sure you experienced this. Take a hedge fund, for example. You're going to have people that they think a certain way and they speak almost a different language sometimes. And I would imagine that that's one of your competitive advantages, that you know how these guys think. You're dealing with much more sophisticated business people than, I'm not going to pick on any other industry, but that's New York City. That's like, you have law firms and this alternative investment space tends to attract some of the best and brightest.
Philistines.
Yeah. The Philistines.
It does. I would say the advantage is that the more intelligent the consumer, the greater their ability to see the value differentiation between the service providers.
Right.
So some people might not, see it and understand it, whereas really smart people do. One other thing that's very helpful is just understanding the way the different organizations are run. If you have a law firm, maybe there's 10 people on the board, people going in and out. Someone wants an office in this spot. Someone lives in Westchester and wants it near Grand Central. For most of the firms that I represent, there's one king or queen, few other people. And if once they understand that you've got their best interest in mind and you're going to execute what they want, you're going to continue to maintain that business. And if they recommend you to one other king or queen, you'll probably get that business. So when you think about sort of, propagating and extending out and getting new things, and again, all this was luck. I had no idea that this was like part of the business plan when I was doing it, but I now can see that over the years.
So when you kind of, something I'm curious about is the deals you do. Mike probably knows a lot better than I do because he's done some of these deals with you. Leases are, 3 years, 5 years. They could be 10 years. I don't know, maybe some of them are longer. Clients you've worked with that you've had success with, you like them, they like you, they'd be inclined to work with you again. They're not going to be in the market for another lease pretty much anytime soon, right?
Yeah.
What do you do to basically make sure that you keep the pipeline strong and the next deal comes in, recognizing that you're not selling them a widget that they're going to go buy another widget next Thursday?
Yeah.
It might be another 7 or plus years before they're ready to do more business with you. How do you deal with that?
It's a great question because the sales cycle is very long for real estate. So I think the average is on 7 years. People transact. It's not the length of leases because not everyone lives out their lease. If they're growing or shrinking, they have to deal with it at that point. So part of it is you just want to make sure that you're in constant communication so that as things are happening, it is a very fluid industry. It's actually very hard to marry this long-term fixed cost and obligation with a business that is so fluid, but making sure that you are up to speed so that you can have everything mapped out where no matter which way they go, you've got an idea of how to sort of lead that group. Then I would say one thing everybody loves is understanding what their peers and competitors are doing. And I'm certainly tapped into that and I'm able to just give very specialized information. And then one other thing I try to teach people in the office is your value shouldn't just be your job. Maybe it's, I share podcast recommendations with Lee all the time. Like we're just in each other's faces all the time because we have other modes of connectivity and shared interests. And
Right.
I encourage people. I will also say that one needs to be careful not to overdo anything. You don't want to dilute your brand or your interaction that when you're sending someone an email, they're like, oh, this law firm's sending me another monthly newsletter about leasing trends. If they're not in the market, they don't care. Right. So you have to make sure that whatever you are sending out there that you think that people are going to like. And if it's on the margin, don't send it.
Yep. No, that's good advice.
If it's on the margin, don't send it. Let's take notes on that.
I was going to say we'll make that part of our weekly meeting internally too, maybe. All right, so let's shift gears because I think this was great, and we can come back to business building and stuff like that. But let's get into the market a little bit because obviously, I think people even outside the industry know that COVID-19 turned the office market on its head. Post 2020, we've had to see what has come back and what hasn't. So maybe talk a little bit about where the opportunities are. We'll keep it to Manhattan because obviously that's where we
Sure.
do most of our business.
Yeah, and it's really stratified. Different parts of town are very different. So I'd start by saying that for my area of expertise, the high-end boutique financial service firms, throughout COVID, none of them were really letting go of anyone. In fact, a lot of them were hiring. And when they came out on the other side, they were one of the first groups that encouraged people to come back. And in the carrots and sticks of getting people back to work, one of the main carrots is having great office space, right? So there was a lot of upgrading, or there has been a lot of upgrading going on. Interest in and around Grand Central Terminal has never been hotter. Basically, the number one way to get people to come back to work is an easy commute. If the commute's really tough, they just don't want to do it as much. So anything around the terminal is sort of white hot.
Basically staying off the subway.
Yes, that's exactly right. A lot of groups say they just don't want to get
No
them on the
subway ride for our employees, and we're good, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
There's
I
definitely
feel
a
that
lot of
too.
Yeah. So, I would have, as we were coming out of COVID, I would have a lot of these sort of cutthroat hedge fund people say, "Hey Ben, there's blood in the water. Like, where are we going to get a great deal?" And you don't want to disagree with them right off the bat. That's not the start of a great conversation, but you also want to be 100% accurate. So what I would start with and say, listen, there are parts of town, Third Avenue right now is depressed, and we can go bludgeon somebody to death on economics and get an unbelievable deal. But if you're saying, like most of your peers and competitors, that you only want to be on Park Madison 5th, 46th to 59th Street, that's super tight. And then if you sort of bifurcate it further with only built space because you don't know how big you're going to be and you don't want to sign a long-term lease and you have to move into built space, then it's super tight. So you sort of have to, narrow it down by the specific thing that they're looking for. And again, there are other parts of town when you look at certain buildings. People ask me, what are you going to do about a building that is an older building with lots of columns and, bad windows, low ceilings? The problem with those is what used to happen is the bottom feeders that would want the cheapest space, those are the ones that say, let's work from home. Because then you save all the rent.
That makes sense. Yep.
So I don't know what the answer is for certain buildings. Thankfully, I don't need to know.
Don't have
but
to
it's
think
hard.
too hard about it.
Yeah.
It's wild. And
What
I think,
I was going to ask kind of a basic question, which is when we talk about office leasing, which we do a lot because our firm is kind of very active in that space, and also with some of our guests today, we talk about the sector of the city you just referred to. Basically, what'd you say, 46 to 59?
North of Grand Central, south of Central Park.
Are there other areas of the city that you're seeing meaningful leasing activity in the subspecialty that you work in?
Yeah, great question. So basically, it used to be, if you think of a heat map, 53rd and Park, like the Seagram's building, Lever House, that was sort of red hot, and then that's where the rents were the highest, and then it would dissipate out from there. What's changed is wherever there's a great building, there's someone who lives around there who will pay to be in that great building. So certainly the Hudson Yards, which I didn't predict would do as well as it did. And for a little while, again, I was a Midtown expert, so I felt like the old guy at the bar who's like, no, stay, come stay here, and they're like, no, we're going downtown. The yards, the quality of the buildings is just so good. And the rents there at the top of those buildings are, the same as Midtown, and lots of firms have gone there. Certainly more than I predicted, and now I've wound up doing, many deals there, and again, the quality of the product is excellent.
It almost feels like a whole sub-city over there. Like whenever I'm in that area, which is not that often because you really have to be going to a business that's located there.
Yeah.
With that I forget what they call that honeycomb structure that's sort of in the middle of it. I look around and I'm like, I don't even recognize this as New York City. If I didn't know any better and you just dropped me there, I would say, I don't know where I am right now.
You really are on an island. So what happens is I will talk through groups. If you're a quant hedge fund and all you need to do is get your employees to work, great work environment, work all day, go home, it makes a lot of sense. But if you're a group that's meeting with other people in Midtown throughout the day, going to conferences, going to lunches, all of that, it's much tougher to do that from there. You don't want to go back and forth to Midtown twice in a day from the Hudson Yards. So groups will wind up, you might have someone who sort of comes into Grand Central, does some stuff, have their scheduled breakfast and meetings in the morning, and then goes there, or vice versa.
Right.
There's not back and forth. I will say there is now a critical mass there that a lot can get done. What a lot of these financial firms were nervous about is when the fundraising parade came to town that they wouldn't be considered, they wouldn't go there. But now there's so many groups of significance that are there that everyone stops in when they're in town.
They got some gravity now. Yeah. Very cool.
So Hudson Yards, are there other areas of town that, you're looking at, like medium to long term? This could be something real. We're seeing people, kind of slowly trickle in, or is it still kind of like Midtown and West is really what's...
Yeah, so there'll be areas like meatpacking, at least for what I do, like meatpacking, where there's a few glass and steel towers, 412 West 15th Street, 40 10th, where groups that I represent will consider, but they won't consider a ton of the buildings in the area. And then there's like sort of like a smattering of those around. There's a bunch of financial firms around Madison Square Park, overlooking the park. And there's been some redevelopment of some existing buildings there. But no, there hasn't been anything outside of the Hudson Yards. There isn't like a new area. And I would say almost categorically, none of the groups I represent go all the way downtown.
Not to the financial district. That's not where the financial stuff's happening anymore.
That's right.
So we're shifting gears back. We can keep talking about the market all day if you guys want to, but one of the things I thought of, because we're sitting here at the Real Deal Forum, a lot of residential brokers here, and in the residential world, there's been a gravitation towards teams for a while now. Are you I know you have a team that we work with, I think everybody on your team. Are you still sort of the exception in the commercial side, or are people gravitating more to teams now?
Yeah, so I think there's been a generational shift, I think, in how brokerage has been done. It used to be a much more sort of shark-infested, really sharp elbows, both, not just externally, but internally. I do think the sort of, I'm now, getting to be part of I'm like the younger end of the older generation now. And I do think there's a much more collaborative spirit, and not just because it's a better way to live life and be happy and not be banging around, but also that it's in your own selfish economic interests. So I've tried over the years to create all types of things internally where it's, hey, if you have one piece of information and there's 20 of us, aren't we all better off if we each share that piece of info with each other? Now 20 pieces of new info, and you might not trade on every single one of them, but it's going to be more than the one that you had. And how can we collaborate and make it so that everyone's going to do what's in their own self-interest? So the idea is making someone's self-interest align with the larger mission. And then also what I would say is CBRE is a little different than others in that there's lots of free agents. So it's almost like people are preferred providers to each other. There's people who you've worked with over the years who trust, may have a specific expertise that you want to bring in for an assignment.
Right.
And I personally like that a lot because I like working with different people. I like seeing other experts, display their expertise and be great at what they do for someone that I may have brought and want to show them great work.
That makes a lot of sense. It seems like that trend is going to continue. Because information, it's not as hard to get information as it used to be.
Yeah,
right?
On the resi side, how much of the residential broker's value was recent comps to compare it to and availability? And you couldn't find that anywhere.
Yep.
And you had to hire the resi broker to get that information. Now that information is free online.
Yep.
So, this is the wrong place for this unpopular opinion, but you'd think that value would be compromised in some way. Fortunately for what I do, that information is not publicly available. CoStar basically, has their own monopoly on it, and they're very litigious if anybody tries to, do a competing service, right? CBRE, we have our own, we have a 30-person research department, and we ourselves do 40% of the deals on each side. So, and there's some overlap, but about 60% of the information we know is pristine because we actually did the transactions. But I do think there will be change. Like in all industries, the middleman, the middle person's getting squeezed a bit because their actual value is diminishing.
Yeah.
So you better be of value.
Yeah.
Let
100%.
me piggyback off that. This is maybe a little bit for my own edification, right? You're a broker. You're representing alternative investment firms, these non-bank financial firms. Can you contrast that a little bit with other office tenants, like a law firm, a nonprofit? Are there certain needs or requirements that these firms have that other office tenants don't? I'm actually curious. I suspect the answer is yes. I have no idea what those needs are.
Yeah. So that is a question I get a lot. What does it mean to be a specialist? And for one thing, it's not so much that the spaces, other than the price points, that they need exactly this or they need this big data center for trading. It's not that. It's that you understand the mindset of the customer so much better. So I do a lot of hedge fund startups. So I get on the phone, and before they even say anything, I said, okay, I understand that, you're just getting going, so you probably don't want to spend any capital on the space. You don't want to spend any human capital and take the time for this to get done.
Right.
Flexibility is probably the number one thing because you don't know if you're going to be double the size or out of business in 2 years. So that's number one, paramount. This is the area you likely want to be in, even though I'm going to tell you that it's cheaper over here. No, we want to be in this area. And you want something that's nice, that denotes stability, but nothing too ostentatious for your first office. And they're like, oh, yeah, that is what I want.
So you've done this
Right?
before.
So you just gave us the secret sauce.
So, it's like anything. It's just reps.
Right.
And then I would say it's everything around the space. So knowing the right attorneys to recommend for that, who've done that before, and the right architects, the right contractors, and anything around the process of the real estate. I know the other people who are as focused as I am in the other industries. So they're looking to me not just for real estate guidance, but for holistic guidance on what to do.
Yeah, that's well put.
Interesting answer. So it's not necessarily the characteristics of the space itself. It's, I am uniquely well situated to guide you through this process.
Just one thing I would say, there are some things about the spaces that are specific to different industries. So for example, for hedge funds, a big thing is what is the presence for guests? And a lot of it is about the configuration of the core of the building. When you get off the elevator, you want the best view to be in close proximity to the reception area, so they go right through. Hedge funds and PE firms do not want people going through the work area to get to the big conference room. And then usually the number ones want visual connectivity, ideally, to the workforce, where from their office they can look out over the whole floor and everyone can be together. That's a big thing now, post-COVID, is you don't want to be divided on multiple floors, because the main reason to come back to work is other people, right? So if you would have had a group that, let's just say, would take 2 10,000-foot floors, now there's much more of a push to say, first of all, there's economies of scale. Maybe we can take 17.5 on one larger floor, and when we get in, everyone's together instead of putting in a staircase, and some people never take the stairs.
No, that's an interesting answer, and I think I'm fascinated by the part of your answer that was more about, I speak their language, I know what they want. They're startups, they are poised to make a lot of money, but they're not really there yet. I know what they want. I know the impression that they want to, convey to the outside world, to investors, to partners, and I'm gonna get them there without a lot of transaction costs. Like we're gonna get to the right result, and we're gonna do it efficiently, and they feel like they're in good hands.
I think that's a huge part of this industry, is they want it succinct, right? So you may have the COO who you're giving, all the documents to, and making sure they see every, I dotted and T crossed. But then, and I think a big part of what was a big deal for me, understanding how to sell better, was to understand that I'm not just pitching to an organization, it's to the individual across from me. So to say to the person who's heading this up, say, I understand this is a big deal for the firm. This is a big responsibility for you personally. What I'm saying is, if you hire me, nobody gets fired for hiring CBRE. and I'm the head of the group that does what you specifically are looking for, and I will make sure again that you'll have all the backup data, but when it's time to discuss within the organization, your principal has zero attention span. They're going to need a one-pager just of the top 3 options, pros, cons, all that, and that's what you're going to get, and that's how they're going to make the decision. Oh, and by the way, if they're at a cocktail party, they hear about a space from a friend, which happens all the time, and they come back to you, why don't we consider this building? And you're able to just pull out the sheet and say, we did, here's the 3 reasons why it didn't work. So I can see when I'm saying that to someone across the table that they're like, yeah, I want that. I want to do that. So that was a big change for how to do it.
Definitely. Yeah, that's our experience with what we'll just call it like hedge fund type clients versus a law firm is the hedge fund will say, protect me and just explain to me my net rent and like, where are the traps?
Yeah.
The lawyers, they want to go through everything and they want to re-lawyer it, but the good ones, the good clients they'll trust you on the industry specific stuff and they won't try to like overpower you.
Yeah. I'll tell you, I'm doing something on the residential side myself in Westchester, and after dealing with New York City type A law firms and going to the suburban, I'm just shocked at the speed that these groups are moving with. And I do the passive aggressive, I'm a little confused. I sent you an email asking you a question. Right. Then I sent a follow-up. You didn't respond. I'm a little confused. Did I do something wrong here? Why don't you answer the question that I'm paying for you to answer? I mean, the urgency is just not there in the same way. What's so nice about the boutique financial service world is everyone's bringing their A game. So there's just an expectation level from everyone involved that it's going to be and if you're used to that and then you get outside of it, it's bumpy.
Yeah, we found the same thing. You would think just outside of New York City where you have like-minded type people, it would be the same. It's not. There's nothing that compares to New York City.
So the takeaway is respond to your emails in a timely fashion.
Yeah.
Or you might wind up getting referred to anonymously on a podcast.
And honestly, if you have to be told that, you're probably you're in the wrong category anyway. You got to like step it down. But
that's right.
All right. Well, this is awesome. Ben, how can people find you? Obviously, they can go to CBRE and look you up there. But what's your preferred mode of communication?
Ben@cbre.com.
There you go. That's simple enough.
I spoke to IT. They gave it to me. It's great.
Nice. It was available. Right?
No other Bens in the organization, right?
Apparently, there's a few thousand because we're 170,000 global employees. So I'm happy to have it.
That is pretty good that you got Ben Friedland. That's like, I don't think, I've never had a Michael Flynn at like Gmail or something.
It's your firm. I mean, is yours just Michael?
We've talked about this internally. Like I'm Mike at BFK Law Office.
All right, you Philistine. Should we wrap it up there?
On that note, nobody wants to hear about my email address, but you have Ben's now. Make good use of it. Ben, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, guys. Appreciate you.
For more on all things real estate and the law, subscribe to this and our other podcasts. Follow Bergstein, Flynn, Knowlton, and Pollina on social media. Subscribe to our newsletter and go to bfklawoffice.com. That's bfklawoffice.com to learn more.